everybody, and welcome to another episode in our 3.2 Carrera rebuild project. Today we're going to be getting to the last little bits on the engine. So in the last episode, if you missed that, we took the whole intake manifold apart, all the bits on that thing. So it's kind of interesting to watch. So if you missed that, go back and watch that. It's pretty cool. Anyway, today what we're going to do is take all these accessories off. We've got our fan, obviously, and the alternator behind it. We got a big shroud over here. A few more, the rest of our electrical loom here we need to take off. We've got some tin, some other bits here and there, brackets and such up front, and the big mountain things. I want to get it completely taken apart so that I can really clean it really well. And underneath here, I could have some other issues, some oil leaks or things. I know we have an oil line up here that needs to be repaired. So it's just kind of that sort of thing. So I want to get it completely torn down and then give it a thorough cleaning. I think I'm going to start by taking off this crossbar. So the engine mounts actually screw into the ends of this thing. And this one's a little unusual. Do you see this dampener here? This dampener is particular to the cabriolets. So the coupes don't have this, which is kind of the thing. It allows this thing to kind of move back and forth a little bit. See that? That kind of cool. And we also have a rubber bushing, I guess, inside here under these 3 bolts. I think it's going to be a lot easier to take some of this stuff off while this thing's actually still on the car. So I'm going to do that first. But as always, with all of this, I'm going to take some photos of things first, just so we know exactly how all this goes back together. These bolts look pretty serious to me. They're 17 millimeters, 3 of them. So I've got my big, huge ratchet here. This one's kind of cool because it's telescoping. I love these things. They're pretty cool. Anyway, let's see if we can get this guy off. Oh, it wasn't that bad at all. All right. That one's a little tighter. There we go. Let me pull the bolt that's holding on this dampener as well. Sometimes I think it's helpful on this to actually kind of pull the bolt almost all the way out and then go ahead and take a picture of it again. That way you can see the orientation of, well, which side did they put the washer on? So it actually goes on the bolt side, not on the nut side in this case. And this is a locking nut as well. So it's just nice to be able to see the whole thing together, sort of like an exploded view. You know, in this case, these bolts look to be in really good shape, actually. They're slightly corroded, but not even that bad, and you can still see some of the yellow cad in there as well. So these are definitely just going to go to the plater. Same deal with this plate. Looks fine, just a little corroded. You can see what it used to look like when it was new. So that's actually a pretty good standard to bring to the plater and say, that's what it should look like. And they'll just go ahead and make the whole thing look like that. All right. Pull this guy off. So it looks like there's a piece of rubber. This is actually rubber. I know it doesn't look like it, but it is. It's rubber all the way around. And then we can kind of see it coming through here as well, all the way around. I wonder, I'll have to check the parts catalog. I'd love to replace this piece of rubber if I could. It's just 30 years old. Even if it's not cracked, it's going to be kind of hard. Next, I'll remove this little dampener. It's just a 10 millimeter nut on the back of it. Go ahead and take that off. Go ahead and get a picture of this assembly as well. 2 big rubber donuts here and a big thick flat washer. As far as whether this thing's still good or not, it feels pretty good actually. It doesn't feel loose and it's not leaking, so I'll bet you this dampener's probably fine. I bet we don't need to actually replace it. It's super easy to replace if you ever do. It's right in the back. I'm going to continue and pull this piece off here. I can see 4 17 millimeter bolts I need to take off. I'll start with those. Wow. Holy cow, that was tight. There it goes. This bracket down here is for the straps that hold the muffler. So those big round straps that we took off when we took the muffler off, they were attached to this bit here. Always interesting. Look at this. There's a washer embedded in there. It must have fallen off. Looks like it's probably from the tin screw. So always interesting what you find when you take things apart. Okay. All right, that's looking pretty good. There's also a nut here that's on a long bracket that goes down into there. We'll get the bracket off later, but we got to get this nut off first, I think. And that's for this air conditioning mount here. And it goes all the way down. It's the last two bolts that we just took off. Just so we don't damage the wiring, there's a few electrical connections over here. I'll go ahead and get this off first. So there's this wire here. Work that one off there. All right. So this top connector kind of looks like it spins off, but it really doesn't. So we just pull that straight up and off it comes. Go ahead and pull this guy off. There we go. And over here we have a couple of 10 millimeters. These guys off. That feels like it's pulling up the whole stud. Oh my gosh, it is. Well, that's interesting. We'll have to note that. Well, look at that. Pulled the entire stud out. The other one was good. Came off the way it should have. Should be able to get our bracket off now. Lift it up on this side. Maybe. Wow, maybe it won't come up, huh? Maybe we do have to take it apart first. Well, that's a bummer. Inside this hole here is a hex, so I'm going to have to disconnect this piece from the other piece back here. It's kind of a crazy assembly here. The cap bolt in here is just a little too, I can't get it off. It's a little too tight to use a standard sort of small T-handle. So if you're going to work on one of these cars, I would suggest buying a set of extended Allens like this. This one is Ares, A-R-E-S. It's a good kit. It comes in a metal box. This is the one I used to get the cap nuts off of the headers all the way around. So that worked really, really well. The shanks look good and they're black oxide coated. So they seem like a pretty quality tool and they're not very expensive. There we go. And kind of makes sense. If you look at the threads there, might be a little hard to see, but there's some blue Loctite on them, so that's probably why this thing was so hard to get out. All right, with these guys apart, we can just pull this guy off here. What looks like a little insert here that we want to make sure we see. Must be one on the other side as well. The little shoulder washers. More mysteries. There's a clip here, and it was just sitting on top of here, just sort of schmutzed in. Don't know what that's for. These little mysteries. Oh, look at this. Holy cow, here's another one. And look at this. A little 10 millimeter nut. Just been sitting down in this little crevice down here. Who knows? That's kind of crazy, huh? Somebody lost that a long time ago, and I'm sure there were some colorful words that were associated with this little nut. Oh well. Well, it's to whoever owned this before, this car before, and lost this little nut. Guess what? I found it. We have one nut back here that's going to be kind of a bear to get off. It's a little bit smaller. It's 15 millimeters, not the 17 that all the bolts were all the way around, but it's kind of occluded by this plate. But what I've got is a pretty short profile ratchet here, which I think is going to fit. You can see this is our nut here, and I think this is going to fit for me. Let's see. There we go. Need more leverage. Like that. There we go. Now, it probably helps that this is actually the last one to come off, because even though I've just moved this maybe half a turn, I can't get my ratchet off. If I didn't have all the other bolts off, I wouldn't be able to pull the entire thing straight out as I'm taking the nut off. This is definitely going to want to be the first one you put on and the last one you take off. There we go. All right. And this is our AC fan belt, so it's just been sitting in there. I think you can kind of get it out fairly easily, but I just left it in there. It's just much easier with that cover off. This whole, this thing's all ew. Ew. So there's a lot of this sort of goopy stuff in here, so I'm looking forward to getting rid of all the goopy stuff. And then as far as these black pieces, I'll probably send them off to the powder coater. Next, I think I'll tackle this corner piece here. We still need to get our fan and alternator off the shroud, and there's some wiring behind there and it's a little bit tight. I think it's gonna be easiest if I can kind of lift the shroud up a little bit. I think that's just gonna make life easier, and this thing's sitting on top of the shroud. Well, this one's already loose because it was a clamp for something, probably a wire or something. So pull that guy off. Well, we've got one bolt down here and one bolt up here. Now this is a great example of taking a good look at your hardware. So the one that's on the top is actually a metal screw. Look at that pointed metal screw. And the one we took off that was down here, which went into the actual block, is an actual bolt. It's an actual regular, threaded bolt. So it's a good idea to just, because you're like, what? And if you ever drove that, oh my God, into the engine block, oh boy, would you be upset. So this guy engine block, this guy into metal. So I will definitely take a picture of those two just so we don't get them reversed. I think it's really important sometimes to take pictures of these guys in context. So exactly where they go, what their washer situation look like. So the reason that's super duper important is because when we send these off to the plater, they're just gonna go ahead and throw a whole bunch of them in a big old batch together. And the washer for this guy is gonna come off, it'll be floating around all by itself, and all you'll have is this. So you'll wanna know exactly what size washer it went with it. And then same thing for this guy here. Its washer, although its washer is captured, which is kind of cool, so it's not going anywhere. All right, we can pull our tin piece off. There we go. Next, I want to get to work on this shroud, and there are a ton of little 10mm bolts, I think, all over the place on this, so I'll go ahead and just pull them all out. That'll get our shroud loose at least, and we'll see where to go from there. Our black shroud looks like it's just about ready to come off. We just have a wire that goes through the back here that's going to the back of the alternator, so we have to be careful of that. Try to lift this up though. Up, Simba. All right, there we go. Okay. Looking behind the fan at the back of the alternator here, we can see there's a white shroud here with some air veins to direct the flow down and to this side here. We need to get this piece off before we can get to the wiring, which is back here. And it plugs into the back of the alternator, which is, you can kind of see a bit of it right here. Now there's 3 nuts here. One here, there's one over here on this side right here, and then there's one down at the bottom. Way underneath here. It's right underneath here. The normal procedure for getting the alternator out of the car when the engine's still in the car is to loosen up the bolts on the top of the shroud there, and then disconnect our strap here, our big huge strap, take off our fan belt, and then you can rotate this entire assembly rearward, which is this direction, and get to the 3 little nuts that are holding on this shroud in the back, disconnect the wiring, and then you can pull the rest of the assembly out. And that works really, really well. I'm doing things a little out of order because we can actually remove the big, huge air shroud first, which gives us better access to this guy. We still have that nut down at the bottom, which is kind of a pain to get to, but I bet you I can get to it already. All right, our nut is 8mm. It's a little locking nut. Just want to be very careful not to drop it into the engine. And there's a little washer behind it there. There we go. Second one is up here. I'm going to take that one off. There we go, our little washer. And our last one's all the way at the bottom down here. A little bit more difficult to get to. Trick is not to drop it. There's a little magnet to pull it off. There we go. We'll carefully work the shroud off the back there, looking out for these wires back here. Just move it back far enough that we can get to the actual wiring that we need to disconnect here. This one here, which is a ground, we have a big set of positive wires down here that we need to take off. And then there's another blue wire, which I imagine is the field wire, right here that we have to take off as well. All right, we can loosen this guy up. So this is an excellent thing to take some pictures of first. So you know where everything goes. Then we're going to put our nut and washer right back on. We don't lose those. We'll take off our little blue wire. This one's really small. It's actually 7 millimeters, so it's a teeny little guy. Just loosen it up. Keep a good grip on that nut so it doesn't go flying. Also the washer as well. There we go. Pull our wire off. Put our washer right back on again. And then the nut right behind it. There we go. And our last connection is this large 10 millimeter. Our nut. There we go. All right, all the wiring is disconnected. Well, here's the back cover to the alternator with the air shrouds on it. Pretty cool, huh? Kind of an interesting bit. Well, that should be it. I'm thinking now we can actually pull this cover off with the wiring still attached. So there we go. We've got our shroud off. We can put this aside. Get a little better view here, the back of the alternator. It looks a little nutty there, doesn't it? With all those connections and things. But these were our wire connections here and here. And then our shroud was hooked to this stud over here, and then this stud way down here on the bottom. Next, I want to take our fan belt off here. So it's pretty simple. This is kind of the same setup basically as a Volkswagen Beetle, believe it or not. We've got a single nut here that we need to take off, and there's shims in here, and that's what determines how wide this pulley is and how tight or loose your belt is. But the big question is, how do you keep it from turning? Porsche gives you this super cool tool. It comes in your toolkit and it works great. So there's a little hole. There's one here and one here, and this actually just hooks in the little hole like that, and all we do is then just hold on to it and we can go ahead and loosen our nut. One hand on the tool here to hold it and the other on your ratchet, and loosen this guy right up. Oh my god, maybe. Okay, the nut's on pretty darn tight. Now, if it's really, really tight for you, like it is for me, I'm gonna use a cheater here, my cheater pipe, so I can get a little better leverage on it. Grab my socket here. All right, I think I'm gonna do better this time. There we go. Oh, holy cow, I've got that thing tight. Always entertaining, huh? So our nut, then there's a cover, and here's the rest of your shims. So in this case, I have 4 shims behind it. Now, same thing a la Volkswagen. You want to make sure that you always keep all of the shims, whether you use them between the pulley halves or at the end of the pulley halves. Otherwise, you can bottom out your end cover and your nut and not get this thing tight enough. Okay. We can pull our pulley half off and get our fan belt out of there, so might as well be replacing the fan belt. I did replace the belts, both the air conditioner and the alternator fan belt here when I bought the car, but that was, that was a while back, so they could stand to be replaced, so we'll go ahead and put that on the list as well. And then on this side, between the pulley halves, we just have 2. Now we can actually remove our fan, just sort of wiggle it off the shaft. It does have a Woodruff key in it, so be careful of that. There we go. We'll definitely go through and inspect this fan pretty carefully. I know that my shroud had a few cracks in it in the webs here, and I was able to repair them with some JB Weld. I think it's fine. These are made out of magnesium, so these are the originals. They're nice and light and everything. They're not particularly pretty, but they are prone to cracking, so that's kind of a bummer. You can buy aftermarket aluminum versions of these, and they look super spiffy. They're really nice. They look awesome, but I think you have to get the shroud shroud and the fan blade. And I think you're talking close to $800 or something like that for them. They're pretty expensive, but they look awesome. So if you find that your fan is, or at least the shroud is just beyond repair, or your fan itself is just chewed up, all the leading edges are, it's just eating a lot of rocks or something, well then the aluminum aftermarkets were going to be your best bet. Now all that's really holding this on anymore is our cap bolt over here on the left side. Can kind of loosen up your strap a little bit. Just be careful to get a good grip on this thing before you start. And all we're going to do is loosen up our strap a little bit and pull it straight forward. There we go. It's pretty heavy. It's the alternator that's heavy. These things weigh a ton. The fan shroud here is actually same as the fan itself, is made out of magnesium, so it's actually pretty light. But this thing, oh my God, up to 20 pounds or something. These things weigh a ton. So they put a lot of stress on the actual webs here. And you need to be kind of careful of that, or at least inspect them pretty carefully and make sure that they haven't fatigued over time or anything's gone wrong with them. Now, as far as the alternator itself goes on the car, I had the alternator rebuilt when we bought the car because it had a bad bearing in it. And I know people give me a hard time about this. They always say my fan belts are too loose, but that's why I have the fan belts kind of loose. Is because too loose, no juice, but too tight, no bearings. And I'd rather have the belt slip a tad than to destroy the bearings in the alternator. They sound great. Yep, everything sounds good in there, so I think our bearings are fine. Next, I'm gonna work our fan shroud strap, holy cow, out. I think you just have to kind of work it through here. It doesn't really want to come through, but there's really no other way to do it. It's got to go through here. Well, this is kind of an interesting issue. Check this out. As I try to pull this strap through, what it does is get stuck between the distributor and the bottom of this part of the case, and it just won't go. Look at that. Isn't that weird? So I think I'm actually going to have to take the distributor off. So there's a 13mm nut here, and I believe the whole distributor comes straight out. But what? Really? So that's just what it is, I guess. I'm going to rotate the engine and rotate our distributor so that we line up on top dead center, cylinder number 1 here, so we know exactly where the distributor was before we pulled it off. So there we go. Now we're lined up with our little mark here. There's a little timing mark up here that says cylinder number 1, top dead center. Remove this 13mm nut here to get this off. Now another thing I did was to clean very carefully around the distributor. The last thing I want is schmutz from a dirty engine falling into that hole. So I cleaned it all really, really well with some brake cleaner and a toothbrush and cleaned it all first. Out comes our distributor. There we go, got the distributor out. Probably not the end of the world to pull it out anyways. We've got a seal here that we could replace, which is kind of nice, and we can also just kind of take a good look at it. And as always, any open hole gets something plugged into it, just so we don't drop something into it, because that is literally into the engine. The timing chains are actually right below that hole. Now we should be able to work this strap through. Sure hope so. Got this bracket on the other side. We'll see if that interferes. We'll have to take that off too. There we go. Suppose I needed to remove this bracket anyways. These have to go off to the plater, and kind of forgot about that. It's got a special nut on it, as a lot of these things do. It's like a centering hub nut, so it stays in the right spot. That's really kind of cool. I'll definitely take a picture of that. For now, I'm going to go ahead and slide our distributor back in. Being careful to line it up so that we're right on the mark here. Okay, and then this thing goes in, and there it goes. Oops, see, now it went off a little bit. There we go. That's a tricky little guy because it's got helically cut gears on it. If you line it up as you put it in, when it goes in, it'll rotate. So you don't want that. So you want to back it up a bit, put it on, and then when you push it in, it'll rotate into position. And that's why it was really important to have this set to top dead center before we took it off. I suppose if you completely forget and you've just pulled this guy out and you're like, oh crap, I forgot to determine exactly where my rotor was, you can always rotate the engine to top dead center here, and guess you've got a 50-50 chance of getting it right, but it should line up with this mark. Better way to do it is to rotate the engine until you line up on your distributor and then take it off. off. That'll save you a lot of headaches. Next, we still have some tin on the back here I'd like to get off, plus our sensors. So we have a rotational and I believe a positional sensor, and then under here is a cylinder head temperature sensor, pretty certain. Anyway, these guys have got to come off. They've got to come out, and then there's a bracket here that needs to come off. We've got to get this off, and then there's a couple over here. There's a bunch. There's just a bunch, as always. Something to note, they were held in with blue Loctite, so we'll want to make sure we put blue Loctite back on them when we put them in. Now, in theory, we should be able to wiggle these sensors out of this metal bracket. Okay, there we go. There's one of them. Looks like I've got interference here, so I'll go ahead and take my bracket off at this point. All right, great, yay. We'll pull our sensor all the way out. Now this bit is just an aluminum bracket, so no real big deal there. It just needs to be cleaned really well. It's really smutsy. This is the condition of our sensors. They don't look too awfully bad, and I think they work just fine. But look at this wiring. It's just coming right apart, huh? Look at that, just falling right apart. So I really can't use these guys again. I'm gonna have to replace them. Don't really have a choice. Look at all that down there. Well, it looks like this wire clamp's seen better days, huh? It's pretty rusty and pretty schmutzy, so we'll be definitely replacing that as well. So next we pull this rubber cover off. Hopefully it's in fairly good shape, don't know. Oh, I think it's part of the sensor anyways. I think this little head sensor is going to be a lot easier to get out once we get the tin off, so I'll do that next. With our tin off, a little better access to that sensor. I think it's just going to be a little bit easier to get off. Even though I'm going to replace this sensor, I thought I'd try my luck at getting it out without breaking it, just in case, oh my gosh, no, you can't get that sensor ever again in a million years kind of thing. That would be bad. So I modified a crummy tool of mine that was, these things are really crappy and they're way, way, way too thick, so it wouldn't fit. So I ground it down a bit. I think it's gonna work. The trick is to get over this wire. There we go. So the correct tool for this, it's actually a socket with a slot in it. It's what you'd use to get an O2 sensor out. We got it out all in one piece, and we can reuse it if we need to. It actually looks like it's in pretty good shape. It goes into a dead hole inside the cylinder head here, so no need to plug it. That's great. And if we can't find one of these things, which I'm pretty certain we can, but if we couldn't, we could put this one back in. Well, holy cow, that was a lot of work, but we got a lot done. We got our shroud off, we got our fan off, we got our alternator, we got all this stuff done, all our tin and everything. So now we're in a great place to actually start cleaning this poor thing. Boy, is it dirty too, schmutzy top and bottom. So that's gonna be our next step, is to clean this. And then all of this stuff back here, all of our spoils from today have to be cleaned as well. And we have parts we have to replace. We've got bits that need to go off to the plater. It's gonna be pretty fun. If you're enjoying this series, subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell next to it to be notified next time we upload a video. We've got a lot more work to do on this, and when we get done with the engine, we're moving on to the car. We've got interior work, exterior work, all sorts of stuff gonna be done on this car. So this is really, really fun, and you're not gonna wanna miss a single episode. Well, I really hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you got any questions or comments, of course, leave them down below and I'll get right to them. As always, a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. All right, well, until next time, safe travels. Bye.